You're listening to the Millionacres Podcast. Our mission at Millionacres is to educate and empower investors to make great decisions and achieve real estate investing success. We provide regular content and perspective for everyone, from those just starting out to seasoned pros with decades of experience. At Millionacres, we work every day to help you demystify real estate investing,
I'm Deidre Ward, an editor at Millionacres, and thank you so much for tuning in to the Millionacres Podcast. The rental market is back, and it is busier than ever. With me today is Chad Guziewicz of Rentify, who's the co-founder of Rentify, which is a technology platform. It helps property owners and managers improve their ability to screen prospects and identify ideal residents, something that's very important right now. Rentify uses an AI-driven approach, and so what it does is it replaces credit checks with a really kind of more comprehensive analysis of the potential tenant's overall financial picture, and that's what we're going to get into today.
Well, thank you for having me on your show.
No problem. So let's talk about artificial intelligence and what it can be used for when it comes to tenant screening.
So really, we're trying to use a different process than what's used today, and we're trying to use bank data to really tell a picture of how tenants are doing today financially and their viability, and just do things completely different than what's been done in the past. And using AI technology to actually check people's answers against the way their statements and different things. So for an example, right now, we check if somebody says, hey, I don't have any pets, but we go in and we actually see pet transactions. Well, I mean, somebody can go once, but if you're constantly every month going and buying pet stuff, then you obviously have a pet. Or we go in and check and you say, hey, I pay rent. We're actually going in and looking for those rent payments as an example. And it's just a different way of looking at things.
So in terms of setting this up, was this a long process for Rentify to sort of get, did you have to get like a critical mass of bank information? It seems like this is really very different than traditional credit checks.
Yeah, what happened was our the first year we set up a bunch of deals with some of the banks and credit unions and all these. We have all these different institutions, and our first questions to ourselves would anybody do this? Would an actual tenant do this, right? And we were in a test beta with one of the associations, and we did that for about a year to perfect the process before we even brought it out to the market to test, okay, is the information we're being provided, will tenants do this? Building up our AI technology to look for certain cadences in those statements to make it quicker and faster for individuals to get the information they need quickly.
So I want to understand and explain to people how the AI works. So does it look for sort of like an ideal tenant profile and then scan against bank information, or how does it work?
So it looks for stuff that really matters for landlords. So we look for certain spending habits. We look for payroll. We look for, are they on government assistance? Do they pay their bills properly? Like I mentioned to the pet transactions, we actually summarize, okay, their income based on their spending habits, how many times they're in overdraft. And we've actually come out with a decision desk where we actually do a pass or fail. And we actually see if they had $500 more in expenses, would that put them over the threshold of being able to afford rent? So we're really trying to, and we're trying to figure this out over and over again as we go forward, because I do believe this is the best way for landlords to pick the tenants, because banks today use that information to like sell you your property. So they're making sure, okay, yes, financially you can afford this. If you had some bumps and bruises in your life, you can still make your mortgage payments. And because of the growth in housing and it's getting so much more expensive, landlords have got to get more sophisticated, because there's going to be more challenges for people as the housing market grows and gets more expensive.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because what you're talking about is a debt to income ratio. And if you're buying a house, you hear about debt to income ratio all the time, but you absolutely don't hear about it on the rental side, because they're mostly just looking for like, okay, you have enough money to pay Fair enough. So that's really interesting, and it sounds like it gives landlords a bit more understanding into the history beyond what a simple credit check can do.
Yeah, and really, as the world we get more and more sophisticated, we really do need the landlords need the technology, especially as housing has grown so rapidly over the last 6 to 10 years. Like as people move out, especially after the pandemic, like they were used to maybe paying 1,000, and now it's like 2,000, and that's just such a huge change for people that are renting. That they're like older people are on a fixed income, so they only can afford so much. And you want to set up your tenant to be successful, just like for both sides, right? It's a long-term relationship, right? So you want to make sure they're actually the right fit, not just on a credit check, but also financially for you too. Because you want to, if you're putting somebody in, you're spending the time to do this, you want to set them up for success. No different than banks do when you buy your properties.
Well, and I think that's another interesting point too, is that in a perfect world, this is a tenant that's beyond 1 year, but I think a lot of times landlords tend to have that like 1 year lease mindset. So I think what you're talking about is really positioning a longer term relationship that's more similar to a mortgage relationship.
I do agree. Most tenants stay longer than a year. Some leave, depending on circumstances, but it is important that you set up them to be successful, just like you, and think of it long term, because it's not okay, I put the person in. It's not a 1 month. You're thinking at least 12 months and hoping longer, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, you mentioned credit scores too. I feel like I know the average credit score, it keeps going up. It's interesting to me. Do you feel like there's some sort of like almost like it's like vanity sizing, but for credit? Is that partly because people are getting more intentional about their credit score? Why do you think credit scores are increasing?
That's a great question. I tried to look at a credit score and I didn't understand what it meant. At the end of the day, like I don't actually understand what it means. But as everything changes, and there's nothing wrong with a credit score. They're perfectly fine. It's just I don't understand all the stuff in it. Even me looking at it, and I'm doing all this different stuff. And I was a landlord at one point too, and I still don't even understand what all the information is. And really, we took credit scores were just made for lending, and we're kind of jimmer-rigging it into landlords saying, well, this seems like it could fit, I guess, and then putting it in. There's pieces for it. There's nothing wrong with it, but we kind of jimmy rigged it into the landlord section, which it was never in the end meant for.
Well, that's true. So when you were a landlord, were you so you had rental properties, and did Rentify come from your own pain points with this?
Yeah, so what happened was I had a 10-plex at one point, and the reason I thought of the idea of Rentify mostly is because I really found it hard to verify the information that somebody provided to you. So I really found it hard. Like they would say, oh, okay, I work at this place. Then I would call the employer, and then I would check. And actually, I found out at one point when I put somebody in, they were only part-time there, but they told me they were full-time. And, calling previous landlords, well, that's a tricky thing because some landlords want to get that person out of their property, so they'll tell you they're good, right? And I just found the information. This is where I was. This is my information. This is how much I made. Is all this correct? Is this person's information correct? Are they giving me the right bank information? Like, I really found that a challenge. Some of the big guys, it was good, but for a smaller landlord, I found that really challenging. And that's really where the concept of Rentify really came, is that the bank helps you verify all that information. So the previous address is coming from the bank. You don't lie there. You can actually match up the name they put in to the actual bank account that they're saying. You actually see the rent payments going out of the account. You actually see the payroll. Like, you're seeing the information you need to verify, and we do it in like, I don't know, five minutes max. And I really found that part of the process was really missing. That verification, and all the other AI has just come based on that concept.
Interesting. Why are credit checks so expensive? Because it seems like if you're a tenant and you're going around you're looking at different places, you have to put in a fee every time. Your process is cheaper, right?
Yeah, it's $10 a check.
So that seems to me. I mean, here in the U.S., they're like averages like $35, and I've seen 50 or even higher. Is that part of why you think that tenants are interested in Rentify too? It's more accurate and it's maybe a little cheaper.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. And then what that advantage gives you is that you can actually run more people now. Instead of paying $35 just for one person, now you can run three instead, and then do a good, better, best, or a comparison against multiple people to make it easier. And the fintech world, this is all from the fintech world, is a cheaper and faster way that banks are doing this. So like guys like PayPal are doing this, and like Simple are using similar kind of technology, but just for their purposes. We're extending it to the landlord world.
Excellent. So right now, are you seeing an increase for services? I mean, it's rental prices, like you mentioned, they've gone way back up since the pandemic. Seems like everyone's just scrambling now to get a rental.
Yeah, it's crazy. The growth and where we started and where we are today has just been unbelievable. The path moving forward, and I agree with you. Everybody's scrambling. The whole market is like kind of messed up, and so people are now able to leave and going different places, and migration all over like people are leaving certain states and going into other states. It's just such a different world. The pandemic has changed so much because of the whole working from home now has really changed everything. Like it's going to be a different world the next 5 to 10 years.
That makes me think about short-term rentals too, because one of the trends that I've been following is like Airbnb and things like that. They keep saying that they're starting to see 28-day stays become more common. So I feel like I've talked to some other people about this. There's sort of this new category emerging that's not the full like 12 months, 18 months lease, but not the like 2-week vacation. Is that something you've seen as well?
Yeah, I've seen the same thing. I agree. The Airbnb has changed things because it's now a new way that people can rent things out and actually go to different places. I saw a new app actually that was you can rent your pool.
Yes, Swimply.
Yes, yeah. So like it's just such a different the whole world has changed how you can valid certain assets and change things, and in 30 days it's a great vacation, and maybe it's easier than going down to Mexico or something for a family, right?
What impact did the eviction moratoriums have on your business? And now that they're mostly ending, do you feel like landlords are more cautious than they were before?
Yeah, because it creates a bottleneck now of trying to evict people, right? And the bad ones and the bad experiences are really piling up. And the other thing I've seen a lot of is that a lot of people are starting to get out of the landlord business because of the growth in the housing markets, depending on which state you're in, have started selling off their pieces because the growth has been so big.
Well, that brings me to another question, which is the institutional landlords. Have you been working with any larger landlords? Are you mostly working with smaller landlords, or are you starting to work with like larger apartment buildings and things like that?
We're starting to get into big apartment buildings. The reason we're an advantage for some of the large ones is because we do it so fast, right? Because the bottleneck of doing it, like literally somebody puts in their questions, do their banking. We have a system now to say whether they're good or bad based on certain whatever parameters the place has, and you're done in like 5 minutes. Instead of spending 2 days calling that person and finding, oh, was that true or this information? That's what they're enjoying. The larger institutions, they get the information faster.
Well, that's got to be good for the tenants too, because then you can get a decision faster. You don't have to wait so long and not know if you got accepted at one place and then maybe you get accepted at the other place. It seems to me that one of the things that I've noticed in the rental business, it's sort of like job applications. You never really know if there's no universal yes or no. And so it sounds like what you're trying to do is get to like a universal kind of yes or no based on the tenant's individual information.
Yes, exactly. And really the importance of doing that for tenants, and they want to have a standardized process. You imagine if you're a tenant applying to 5 different places and all they want is all different stuff, and you're like, okay, I need this and they need this, and you're sending all this personal information about yourself through email. And how do you know like what's going on? We're all worried about security today, and yet tenants are sending all this random information to people. And really, we're trying to create a standardized process for your information transfer.
Yeah.
So it's important, I think, even for tenants.
Yeah, I would agree with that. All right, let's take a quick break here.
Like what you're hearing? Get more real estate investing news and advice from Millionacres on Instagram at Millionacres and on Twitter at Millionacres_co.
Some of our listeners are undoubtedly among the fortunate group sitting on piles of valuable tech stock. If you're one of them, listen up. Urban Catalyst could help you with your tax bill when it comes time to sell. Urban Catalyst is the premier qualified opportunity zone fund based in Silicon Valley. And if you meet investors' qualifications and invest in a qualified opportunity zone fund, you could potentially get big tax breaks. Here's how it works. When you go to sell your stock, you will likely generate a large capital gains tax bill, which means Uncle Sam may want to take a large chunk of it. If you're not keen on sending all that money to the U.S. Treasury, Opportunity Zone funds like Urban Catalyst can help you shield those gains. And Urban Catalyst isn't just any Opportunity Zone fund. Forbes magazine and the Sorensen Impact Center ranked Urban Catalyst one of the top 20 OZ funds in the country. Don't wait too long. If you invest before the end of this year, you may not only defer capital gains taxes, but you also may be able to reduce your capital gains by 10%. And as an added incentive, if you hold your investment for 10 years, you will likely not have to pay any federal taxes at all on those gains. And it's not just stock sales. Capital gains from real estate sales, selling your business, or even a big crypto sale, these types of capital gains can all get potentially favorable tax treatment by investing in an Opportunity Zone fund. Urban Catalyst focuses on development in downtown San Jose, an area prime for growth and revitalization. You can learn more about the fund and the numerous development projects underway by visiting urbancatalyst.com/millionacres. But keep an eye on your calendar. You only have 180 days after your capital gains event to invest in an Opportunity Zone program. So visit urbancatalyst.com/millionacres today.
All right, I'm back with Chad Guziewicz and Rentify. We're talking about tenant screening. And so I know you operate in both the U.S. and Canada. Are there any different rules across the two countries?
Yeah, there is some big differences. Canada is a little more socialized, so we have a little more. It takes a lot longer to kick people out. So in here, it's much bigger of an issue to actually get people out. In some provinces, it takes almost a year to get somebody out. So if it's a problem, that's how long it takes. So it's a big challenge, and that's where it's first come from because of the challenges. I know different states take longer than other states, but here, that's the biggest difference. It takes a lot longer to evict somebody.
Interesting. Did you have a national eviction moratorium?
Yes.
And how long ago did that expire?
It just ended probably in the summer, realistically, but they're probably a year backlog now.
Wow. So is it similar to the U.S.? It goes through the courts and all of that?
Yes, it does. And and I don't know, as bad in the U.S. as if you don't do any of the stuff correctly or paperwork, it all starts all over again.
Oh, wow. So when you were a landlord, did you ever have to go through the eviction process with anyone?
Yeah, I did. So funny story. I'm glad you brought that up. So I had somebody in my building at one point, and they weren't paying rent anymore. So I started the process, and they got very upset that I started kicking them out. And they actually poured tar down the piping. So I had to actually replace all the piping. It was a 10-plex, and I had to replace all the piping in the building as kicking this person out through the whole process.
Oh my God, that's awful.
And it was like, it wasn't awful. I had great tenants, some other great ones, no issues with them, but this one was terrible. And it took all the way to the end to get them out. And, you know, what are you going to do once they're gone? You're going to sue them or like, it's just a mess. And it was a whole mess of a situation. So it taught me a very valuable lesson that you screen the people you put in.
Yeah, that sounds like a very painful lesson to learn. Did you have a background in technology or engineering or anything before you developed this?
Yes, so I did the landlord at the same time, and I also started another software company that was called Tire Wizard that actually helps the auto dealers sell tires, wheels, and accessories at the same time. And that business took off hugely across in the Canada at least. And once I was done that, I was sitting around with one of my partners, and I was saying, "What other things could we do?" And I said, "Well, I remember when I was landlord." And then we took the similar learning experiences from there and brought a technology into the same space to try to change really the process of screening tenants to make it easier, better for landlords and for tenants. And that's how they started.
Well, I wanted to circle back to what you said earlier about screenings and security and keeping tenants safe. So with credit checks, sometimes I know that there's a concern of like having too many credit checks, that it might hurt your credit report. Is that so with this, there's not that kind of risk, right?
There is no risk. It doesn't hurt your credit, it doesn't do anything. It's literally we are getting your bank statement and analyzing it and giving the landlord the appropriate information.
So is it just the bank account as the single point of contact, or are there other things that you loop in like utility payments or things like that, or it all goes through the bank account?
Yeah, everything that's in that institution, we get all the information and we just analyze the appropriate information that the landlord needs. That is what they need to make the best decisions on their tenants. So you see all the utility payments, all their payroll coming in, government assistance, their income, the stuff you need to know that for you to make the best decisions.
And is it just like traditional banks? You mentioned credit unions. What about like decentralized banks and things like that?
We have 95% of the banks in the U.S.
Wow. How long did it take you to get all of that together?
There's these partners now, like I was mentioning, these fintech. This is a fintech world where banks have been creating this technology to provide to guys like PayPal, Wealthsimple. There's a million other people that are using this kind of. If you're transferring money from an institution to somewhere else, they've been creating this technology the whole time. So all the banks have created this technology and grouped them together, and you can actually pull it from a source. But you have to get certified. There's a whole process to do it. They don't just give it to everybody. There's a whole security process that they go through and everything. So that took, like I said, a year to get all that in place.
Yeah. So things like Plaid and things like that.
Yes.
That makes sense. Yeah. So another thing that you talked about earlier that I think is really interesting, I saw this on your website too, the idea of identity fraud being a concern for landlords. Like how common is that? Is that something that happens relatively often?
So yeah, actually there's been some interesting stuff that come out about that. So one of the most important things is we actually make sure that the name they provide matches up to the bank account. You would be surprised how many people that doesn't actually match up. There's actually a percentage of that, and I'm assuming those people are the scammers.
Yeah.
Because they figured out a way to do that to landlords. And like I mentioned earlier, we had a client call us recently that's getting on board out of California that is worried because what's happening now, because of housing prices is so high, especially in California, has grown so fast that people are starting to fake the information because they're getting desperate on the housing because it's so unattainable for certain sectors of the society, right? And they're putting up fake pay stubs, fake bank statements, fake workplaces just to get into places. So they're giving fake information out. And if you Google it right now, and you could do it after, there's actually like 15 companies that will alter bank statements for you.
Wow. So people show up. It sort of reminds me of people with like fake vaccines, where they have the fake vaccine cards. It's like you can fake your bank statements, and then there's not really, if you're a smaller landlord, then there's not really a way to check, right?
Not at all.
Wow. Yeah, I could see that's a huge problem.
So that's kind of why you want to get it directly from the bank. It's very important so that you know it's a verified information, that it hasn't been altered. And it's just the way the world is. There's very sophisticated, people are getting sophisticated. Again, your rent payments are one of the it is the highest thing that you got to pay for. So, if you can get out of it or you can get in, it's different things. But that's the challenge as we move to a more digital world, right? It's just the way it is.
Are there any concerns about cybersecurity or hacking or anything like that? How do you kind of keep things separate?
So what we do, and that's probably the best question you could ask, is what we do is we don't get any access to your card or password. We just get the statement. So we get that immediately. And what we do is after 30 days, we anonymize the data. So we actually take the identifying information, who the person is, their information gets taken away from that. So you can't actually identify that individual with that person's information. And we separate the data on the moment we get the information and analyze it. So you can't fully put it back together.
Interesting. So you've got all this anonymized data. Is there then an application for that for you in terms of finding out who's a successful tenant or finding out, different qualifications? Is there then eventually some sort of, research that might be available that could help landlords?
It could be down the road in the future to give a segment, because the interesting stuff is eventually maybe in certain cities we can say, well, if you increase the prices by 2 or 3%, this is the challenge of the segment that will have problems. If you increase it by 10%, they may have a default problem by you increasing it 10%. You may have to keep it stable, or there's all this. As you learn this information, there could be down the road, but it doesn't identify to any individual. There's no individual. It's just summarized so that landlords maybe in the future can start making better decisions. You can say, oh, well, maybe in Cleveland, for an example, actually the average rent and different stuff is actually at $2,000 and we're actually at $1,500. Maybe we should actually increase our price, and the population can handle that price.
Well, that kind of gets me thinking, because that's something that I've wondered about too, is pricing. And you see that on the home for sale side, we have like the Zillow's estimate or something like that. But really, when you're trying to price out a home for sale, you just kind of look at what else is in the market. There's not really like a sort of like an AI-driven solution. The Zestimate is like the closest we have. On the rental side, there's some of that is starting to happen with some of the rental portals, but it doesn't quite exist yet for landlords in most areas.
Yeah, and that's really what we're going to do. We're going to try to do in the future so that landlords can make the best decisions for their properties and their cities, and maybe for investors and saying, well, right now we're seeing the hottest market is, I don't know, anywhere in the States. I don't know, Austin, Texas as an example, right? So maybe that's the hottest market. We can see the growth in pricing. Maybe I should get in, or maybe I should sell, or you're trying to get that kind of data that you can see. That's very helpful to make the best decisions for you.
Could also help with policies, which makes me want to circle back to the pet retailer spending thing. Because I think that's like a fascinating detail, is that you can look and see like, oh, someone's been to Petco. There's got to be a dog somewhere if they're going to Petco every month. Do you find that landlords are reconsidering their pet policies? I've seen some information that some landlords are thinking differently about that. Do you think there's any change because so many people got a pet during the pandemic?
What I see is, what I truthfully think is that landlords don't want to be surprised after. If you have a pet, they want to know that, right? And if they don't know it, it becomes it's such a pain point. And you say, okay, there's no pets, or there is pets, and they don't know. That's really where the challenges come. But I think a lot of landlords are changing the policy. We are having such a major shift in the next 5 to 10 years because of the way work is going to be conducted. I just think that we're all going to have to be a little bit more open-minded to the way people live, right? And with change, there's great opportunity, right? So I think it's all good no matter what, and you just have to adapt as things change, right?
Well, I think that's also it's a red flag too, because it's a fundamental dishonesty. If you say you don't have a pet, and hey, you've obviously been to the pet store a lot, it may mean that there's something else that you're trying to cover up or something like that.
And there's one unique one we're working on right now that hasn't been released, but I'm going to tell you anyways because I like all the new stuff. And we're working on a detection to figure out whether or not the probability of somebody being a smoker.
Really? Oh, now landlords are going to love that. That is a huge issue.
Yeah, so we're looking for certain habits, like where you buy cigarettes and different things. So we're building out the data right now to actually look for that long term, whether or not they're a smoker or not. The probability. You can never be 100% accurate, but a probability that they're actually a smoker.
Wow. Yeah, this is fascinating to me because there's so many different lifestyle things that you can learn by someone's spending habits on a really fundamental level. I mean, it could be in terms of, people saying that they have, how many people are in the house or something like that. There's all kinds of things that you could probably learn from bank statements.
The other one we're learning and we're working on too is like, are you subleasing?
Mm.
We're trying to figure out, we haven't had very many of them, but we're learning how to look for these certain, are you subleasing your lease to somebody else based on the way you're collecting the money? And actually looking at the habits of going into their bank account to see if they're actually subleasing to somebody else for a higher price, even though you signed the lease.
Interesting. Has that become a problem for a lot of people in this sort of like Airbnb world?
Because of the Airbnb world, you asked me that question, it for some reason popped in my head now, but that's why they're like getting the place, then they're leaving, and then Airbnb-ing it out to somebody else, and the landlord has no idea this person's doing that, and they're making money off of that.
Interesting. Wow. Yeah, it seems like there's definitely, you talked about remote work. There's so much flexibility. People want shorter leases. They may want more ability to go from place to place. So if I'm wondering if you had, do you have with Rentify, do you build an account for someone and then they can, if you're a tenant, you can apply multiple places?
We're actually working on that right now. I was actually looking at it today where tenants will now be able to buy a bank check and actually supply that to landlords, saying, okay, this is my, no different than when they had a credit check, but here you go, this is my Rentify bank check.
Interesting. And would there be a grading system along with that? Are you sort of like would it be like you're kind of like Rentify certified or something like that?
Yeah, we would do something like that, and you have to be careful because every property is unique to what they need, right? It could be like
Mm.
certain landlords need certain things differently than other ones. It's like, so you're really just saying, okay, this is me, this is who I am. Do I fit what you're looking for?
Does what you do run up against any state laws or city laws or things like that? Because I know there's like certain tenant rules. Like I know in Seattle, there's the first come, first serve rule. Do you have to sort of factor in those rules as well in terms of what you can give to different landlords in different states?
That's actually a great question. That was one of the first things we did. On top of trying to figure out would tenants ever do this, because that was the first question. And then, okay, is this breaking any laws? And at the end of the day, it's what we're doing is we are passing the information. I don't make a decision whether or not the tenant goes into the place. We're just passing the information along. The most secure, best way of doing it and giving you the information for you, the landlord, to make the best decision.
So you've talked to a lot of different landlords. What do you think is the biggest concern that they're talking to you about right now?
That's a great question. I think the biggest concern, honestly, is just it is for me. It is probably just making sure that they're picking the right tenants. At the end of the day, the biggest concern is picking the right the tenants, and that's really the number one thing. And if you have a good tenant, you have a great experience. If you don't, it's a lot of work. And I guess one other one is obviously that the eviction piece is happening now, so they have to reevaluate everything right now. So, do I keep this a tenant? Do I kick them out? That whole process now.
Well, this has been great. Last question for you. Where do you see Rentify in 5 years?
I actually believe this technology, I won't be the only company in the marketplace doing this. I believe that this banking technology will be all over the place. People will be doing it as we start inspiring. We want to be the leaders in this technology. We want to be the guys that bring all the newest pieces, showing you this new path that never been away. We're trying to, we want to be like Elon Musk, bringing electric to the world, but we want to be the ones leading, bringing bank checks to the world. And I'm telling you, this information is so powerful and so game changing. We will not be the only ones. I believe 5 to 10 years there's going to be lots of people doing this, but we are going to be the leaders of it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time. So reminder to listeners, you can learn more about Rentify at trustrentify.com. Stay well and stay invested. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to the Millionacres Podcast. I hope you liked today's show. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing through your favorite podcast provider. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop us a line at help@millionacres.com. Stay well and stay invested. People on this program may have an interest in the deals, offerings, or services they discussed at Millionacres, or the Motley Fool may have a formal recommendation for or against. Always consult a certified tax professional before acting on tax advice, and do not buy or sell assets based solely on what you hear.